Happy Valentine's Day from the couch once again. I was just gonna drop a little video because I feel like I've been talking a lot about myself too, which is like over introspection to a degree in my testimony. But since today is all about love and all that good stuff, I was thinking about how that actually works with money. Because for a lot of my time doing this simple living stuff, I've kind of been a little averse to it, I mean, to say the least. But well, actually, I found that sometimes, and I remember I've ran into various groups that were, talking about what's your relationship to money and to embrace the money flow and kind of the little wooey secret esque dynamic to money. But there is some element of truth to it because money is, in some ways, an expression of affection and love and support and care. In our crazy world, it's just, money and resources are flying around in a lot of ways to honor that dynamic. Now, of course, there's a bunch of that's the thing is that brings money down so much is that it's so corrupted and poisoned and polluted that even though a lot of it is for supportive loving reasons, like when you go get a massage and you're supporting somebody who has to eat, has to have a roof over their head or a van under their butt, whatever. And then you're receiving love and affection in a healing supportive way through body work. That's a win-win, you know. But I was often so obstinate with my strong view about the moneylessness that I was just kind of repellent. I was repelling a lot of it when I could have really welcomed it more while still living simply. That's the thing. Because I didn't have to go so hard. I didn't have to go so hard in the paint for moneylessness, as they say, using an NBA analogy. And then I've talked about this in some of my other videos. It's like that very like OCD level of spending $2,000 a year for basically a decade is like cool. Like, and other people that also live simply spend 5 to 20,000 a year, and that's still pretty simple. So it's like it's just a number. What are you doing on a daily, weekly basis with that money flow and financial situation? Because there is a law of diminishing returns, and it's not very fun to ride the line of poverty and houseless, uh, you know, insecure housing. But yeah, I've talked about that a lot. But yeah, the money and the resources, and sometimes I think when I think about Deer Park and returning, which I'm leaning strongly till still towards doing that in the spring, is that it's almost like here's your boomerang reward if you just accept it. You know, if you just let these loving folks in brown embrace you and take you in, it's there. You know, it's definitely very open because that's what's kind of hard too in terms of acceptance and rejection and all that kind of thing when it comes to like joining a monastery as a monk or a nun. Talking about on a day of Valentine's Day of I choose you. It's like yeah, I mean there's a lot of pressure. And then I think even when I was there the first time, I sort of there was this element of on a subtle level of like, and this kind of goes back to some of my attachment styling with relationships is like, well, I'm not even gonna give them the opportunity to reject me. I'm just gonna do that for them prematurely. There is a kernel of truth there besides some other things that weren't clicking because right, it's like I don't have to worry, I don't have to fret about that decision, which there's like we can unpack decision anxiety with that too because I just make it instead of being in this, will I want to join, will they love me, will that's the whole thing about, I found oftentimes in relationships, which I made a private video for my own record keeping testimony about my romantic experience of my entire life. And I talk about some of that stuff there too, where it's like, yeah, I mean, defensiveness, the guard is up. You know, you can't get hurt if you don't play the game, kind of a thing. And that goes back to somewhat of the money flow because I'm just going to exist outside of it as much as I can and not reap that support and contribution, And I saw it most often in terms of the money flow when I was doing kaleidoscope yoga by donation. And that was very direct one to one, where it was like, this is what I'm doing, and I'm impacting you guys in my class every week directly. And boom. And it was like very easy. What I also tried to get going too, which was a little more vague but still worthy, is kind of the crowdfunding model. With I was inspired by like a lot of vegan activists, especially like James Aspie and other people that had like Patreon and stuff, and people to show their love and affection for these folks that were putting their efforts out there. They can contribute just a little bit. And over the years, I've received little bits of money, and one of my friends, actually, one of my vegan friends, gave me a good chunk. A couple times, actually, when I was, I remember very vividly, I was sitting on the bleachers at the Boys and Girls Club here in town a couple of years ago. I think maybe even before I went down to Deer Park. And I just got this little notification on my Venmo. I was like, whoa, that's a good chunk from one person. And for me, it goes so far. I'm not flittering it away. And that was always so dumbfounding to me. Is like, these James Aspie types and whatnot, they're bringing in thousands on donations a month usually, and obviously they're very well known, so they can sort of pull that in. But I could honestly, even now, going forward, um, like if I didn't do the monastic route, I could function pretty well on like a couple $100 a month, you know, because that pays for like transport and little miscellaneous things and all the other stuff. Generally, if I'm doing work trade or whatever, isn't such a big deal for housing or. But just a few $100s a month. I think I was asking my Patreon. I was asking for $250. You know, and that's what I just part of that sadness about my failure, so to speak, my rough road, is that yeah, it's like, why didn't that come together? Because I was out there a lot. I was doing a lot of things for many years. But it's just sort of like the model isn't there. The model isn't there. People don't quite know what to do. And then often there's confusion because, like, what about these other 25 activists that are doing awesome things and maybe even more direct things, like they're organizing all these marches and things. And, so it's like, are they not too deserving of crowdfunding? Yes. So it can really, yeah. So it's like everyone is deserving of that love, care, and affection through monetary resources. But it's tough, because we don't always have enough to give in our scarcity monetary model. And scarcity is the opposite of love and abundance, which is further confusing. Because, like I said, this powerful alchemy of money is just polluted with grossness. Where the heart wants to give freely, but we have constraints with the system, and it really kills me. And it's really at times pushed me to my breaking point, trying to grapple with all this stuff. Because how can I be tender hearted and soft and gentle and giving and all this stuff in this sort of dynamic when it comes to money and it comes to labor? So many people are laboring. It's not a labor of love. you know a lot of these things we do for money to get by are not labors of love. And that's what I've always been so mindful about, is really being mindful about what are you giving your precious energy to, especially for money. And that's why I like going back to Deer Park. It's like, talk about right livelihood and joyful money stream, because it's like the ultimate right livelihood. Really, it's way up there. Because yeah, you are living very simply in community, and you're spreading the Dharma, and you're giving people wisdom nuggets, and you're also giving them through one-on-one talks and other things and other little projects. You're giving them all your experiences that are not even, monastic related. They can go back to your previous life things, which I have a lot to offer. You know, so it's just tough because it's like so many of us have to monetize just random things just to function. And so with Deer Park too, it's like, maybe I can drop the simple living hyper focus and just focus on love and compassion and teaching that and spreading that. Like love is my religion, as they say, more than anything, right? More than, this is the way we ought to live, and we need to be doing permaculture and da 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 da, and like not buying stuff. And I mean, which I'll believe in, but it's sort of like that can take a little bit of a backseat to the Dharma and this wholesome message. Because over the years, a lot of people were like, well, you should do all these workshops on simple living and da da da. And I have done little bits and pieces of that over the years, but I've often felt weird because once again, it's sort of like, is that does that spark joy? And then how do people even replicate that? Because I was living in Portland, such a outlier life too, that it was even weird for some of my recommendations, even though a lot of it's like live in an intentional community, become a monastic, don't go to college, all these sage pieces of advice, which I still believe are correct. I've given this advice to many people over the years when I was in Portland, so that's always nice. I have a lot of people come to me, but it can only go so far because I can't fix the system. It's really messed up. So it's like you can stop buying coffee every day, and that'll probably improve your financial situation. But will that allow you to work part time and then you can contribute more to beautiful things? Maybe. But it's tough. So I don't know. Yeah. Well, it's just like I said. It's that aversion, that scorn for money. You know, that has repelled it for much of my simple living. When yeah, I don't know if that's true. And part of the problem too, um, is it kind of breaks the wheel a little bit because if I had more income, joyful income, then I could also spread it around too in the same way. And and in some ways I was kind of a Scrooge, ironically, even though I mean I barely had any income for years and years and years, but whenever I did get money, I wouldn't spend it. That was the whole secret. That was my mantra. It's just like don't spend it unless absolutely necessary. But I'm open to re exploring if that was so wise as a rule of thumb, because it's sort of a blockage to that giving and receiving, you know, a little bit in the monetary sphere, which we all unfortunately are tied into. So like, I don't think I would have been flitting it away, but there's certain things like, like when you go to something and it's like no one turned away from lack of funds. And I would always be like, okay, well, with my lifestyle, that means don't give them anything for the most part because I really have nothing to spare. When and that seemed okay. Or there's other ways that I could contribute too, like I'd bring food or some other things, or I mean, for a training one time, I did like body work and stuff. So there's different expressions, but the universal denominator, and this the easiest thing, is the money. You know. So I would often be not turned away, but I wouldn't even bother going to these kinds of events because there is still, because we live in the system, there's still overhead. Everybody's got overhead. Everybody has a footprint, so there's still an expectation, even though it was softened, of please contribute. So sometimes I wouldn't, out of kind of a over politeness, I wouldn't go. But that's an interesting thing that I've noticed over the years, where it's like I could have been that giving and receiving more. Because that's what some people would say, like, it'll just return to you. And I was like, I don't know. That's the scarcity. It's like, if I give you $10, $20 for this kirtan, whatever event, will that manifest back in my life? And then it'll just all kind of cancel out and whatever. Maybe. I think that's worked regardless of me giving money or not. It's come back and I've received money, but yeah, it's just all these lessons from what I'm leaning towards closing off as a 10-year experiment in radical simplicity. And I felt like that even when I made that mendicancy video, where it was like, this almost feels like a capstone. Instead of like 10 years and then another 10, I'm like, well, I think it ran its course. Because I need more love. And that was just too rough. Too rough. Too stringent. And so and that comes back to your offerings. What are you offering? What are you contributing in the name of love, in the name of compassion and caring and all that? And that's really where the magic flows. And that's, as I've talked about over the last few years, that's why it's been so detrimental being isolated. Because if one is isolated and I'm not actively contributing on a grand scale, like I'm not necessarily writing a book or whatever. And of course, some of these videos are sort of my contribution to the philosophical realm. But if you're not actively out there plugging in and focusing on your offerings, then yeah, the whole circle shuts down. And that's what I found in Portland, and that's why it worked out pretty well, because I was always engaged. And so just stuff would fall in my lap. And it was like, okay, that's what I'm doing. So yeah, don't get isolated. It's not good. It's very, very bad. Because yeah, you're alone. You're alone so much. And how can love exist in a vacuum alone? Which oftentimes over the last few years, because of the lack of community and lack of just people, I've had to have more of a self focus naturally, turning to spirituality even. I think that's why one of the reasons why I was rolling with the J Dog with Big Christ, because I was lacking so much of that just community, person to person love and affection and care for so long that it does drive people to the higher power stuff, because it's like, surely God loves me and Christ loves me. As I look at my painting that I pulled out of storage, that's from my stepmom who passed away, that says, I know I'm somebody because God don't make no junk. And that's a pretty wild concept to think, that there's this higher power that created us and like imbues us with this unquenchable love, So, and I remember hearing that critique about Buddhism actually, because there was some element of it. There's a lot of talk about compassion, but where's that kind of love? Like the divine love, that's like it's a whole different ballgame. So I'm actually interested to incorporate some of that, because I still, Christian element is so loaded, and a lot of it's so ugly, and just like what a minefield that it's just too much for me to really take on. But I do have a Christ consciousness that I still incorporate, and I'm hoping to meld that into whatever I plug into. And that's one of the things I'm pretty sure about Thich Nhat Hanh and Plum Village, because they're also very interfaith friendly. You know, I mean, living Buddha, living Christ. That's like pretty profound, and you won't find that in a ton of schools. You know, there's sort of a awareness about Christ and Christianity because it's such a prolific thing, especially in the West. But you know, I think Plum Village tradition especially was very aware of that. And I think even there's a brother at Deer Park who I always say, "God bless you." I found very beautiful, very sincere. So yeah, on the day of love, love and money.